Hello, everybody. Welcome, welcome. Today we'll be talking about our ability to create pre and post tests so we can look at those exams and kind of make decisions, informed decisions, especially at this time of year. That's really important. I'll go ahead and get us started. We'll dig in first with our objectives. We'll be able to do 3 things by the end of this session. The first one is we have to actually be able to create the pre-tests and the post-tests. So we'll talk about the logistical steps to creating pre and post tests within Edcite. And then we'll talk about how to use the pre-test to inform instruction or review. And then using the post-test data to look at the 2 exams together and analyze growth. So those are the 3 things we'll be able to do by the end of the session. Now let's talk really quickly about why that's important. We know that pre-tests and post-tests can really inform instruction, and at this time of year, inform review. They can also increase ownership. The tighter we can make that feedback loop between when a student does work and they get feedback, the more we're going to see that student really owning their learning. So if they can take a pre-test and then work on the review or work on the instruction and get a post-test with immediate feedback on whether or not they've mastered what they're supposed to, those students are going to increase their feelings of ownership over what the data says and how their actions really influence that data increasing. And the same is true of teachers, right? So if we're school leaders and we're able to show teachers how students did on a pre-test and a post-test, we can really increase teachers' ownership of their teaching and how effective their teaching is in certain areas and where they may still need to grow. We also know that we can measure, well, we kind of just talked about this for a quick second, right? We can measure the effectiveness. And at this time of year, we're really thinking about review, right? We're getting towards that time of year where we're reviewing with students. So some teachers can be great all year long, and then in that stress and hustle of review, they struggle, or they might shine, right? And so this will help us measure which teachers are really strong at review. And then something that Edcite is always great at, I think, is when we look at the reports, we can be really specific with what our celebrations are. So we'll look at these reports with that lens of how can we drill down to what standards and students and domains really deserve to be celebrated for the growth that they've shown. And I mentioned the time of year, right? Because, you know, we all know testing is top of mind as we head into the spring semester. And so we'll really be talking the most about how pre and post tests can inform review and then measure review effectiveness. Those will be the 2 things that we kind of zoom in on in this session. So let's talk about how to create post tests. So first you would create your pre-test, then you would make a copy of your pre-test. And then all you have to do is rename the copy of that pretest, and usually that includes adding the name post-test, and then you assign it to students. So here you can see I'm on the My Assignments page. I make a copy of the assessment, and then I just change the name to include post, because now I know this is my post-test, and then I can assign it to students. Quick note for our Edcite schools users, you'll see this extra little box on the bottom left. If this is a common assessment, meaning you've locked it and other people cannot make changes to it, you'll need to unlock the common assessment before you make the copy for your post-test. And then once you've created that post-test, you probably want that to be a common assessment as well, so you'll want to lock that post-test. So that's just an extra step for Edcite schools users. If this is a common assessment, you'll unlock it to make the copy, rename it, and then you'll relock both copies, just to ensure that test security and that those remain common assessments. All right, so we talked about kind of zooming in on 2 specific areas, and that first one is informing review. So when students take the pre-test at the beginning of a school year, it's to really inform first instruction, right? Where are kids? Where do I really need to focus in as we're moving through the school year or maybe even the unit? At this time of the year, often those pre-tests are used to inform review. But regardless of when in the year it is, this is going to help you know, our kids took the pre-test, here's where I need to focus and here's how I need to do it. So if we're talking about a review calendar and our kids have taken the pre-test, we're really going to recommend that you kind of take the standards and put them into different buckets. We have 3, you can be creative, you can go all out, you can have multiple different buckets, but just this idea of we can look at the pre-test and we can make really, really strategic decisions about what to do with each standard and what to do with the content in the pre-test. So let me show you a little bit more specifically what that looks like. So once students take the pretest, a really easy place to go for our standard users and our Edcite schools users is that summary report. And in the summary report, I can look at standard details and I could quickly decide what bucket standards need to be in. Now, the percentages on the screen are just a suggestion, right? If I'm teaching third grade science versus 11th grade AP US history, these standards might look, these percentages might look a little bit different, but here's the big idea. I want to know, based off of this pretest, what are some things that, number one, I can do a quick review of. I can throw it in a do now. I can add it to a review game. I can put it on the homework, right? The majority of my kids understand this concept. It's not something that we really need to dig into. I can throw it in that quick review bucket. In the image on the screen in this pretest, I promise they were all fake kids. No real kids took this assessment. So it's really high. If your pretest doesn't look like this, don't sweat it, right? But the majority of these objectives would probably fall into that quick review bucket. You know, the majority of kids get it. We can throw it into a quick spiraled in review and everything's going to be okay. The next bucket is that reteach using pairs or group work. And so here you want to think about, where did at least half, probably a little bit more than half of my students really master this content? They understand this standard, they understand the steps or the concepts that they need to know in order to master this. And then what you can do in class is you can reteach using group work. You can make sure that you have students who mastered that concept paired with students who maybe struggled with that concept, and you can kind of use them to help each other and really do that peer tutoring or that authentic group work so that students are able to work together on a review. And then that third bucket is the teacher-led reteach. So this is where, you know, less than half the kids get it. If I pair them up, it's going to be so confusing because they don't even know how to lead their partner or their table to the right concept. This is where I need to just explicitly model the steps or explicitly reteach the specific concept that students need to have mastered in order to show mastery of this content. So again, this is all in the summary report. I'm just looking at this one report and I'm able to switch over to the standards details and very quickly throw each standard into one of these three buckets. And I really have the outline for my reteach plan based solely on that. So kids take that pretest, I look at the summary report, I'm able to open the standard details and I'm able to take each standard and throw it into one of those buckets. At that point, then I'm able to kind of go in and specifically plan reteaches. For our Edcite schools users, I really want to call out that we have so many tools here to help you in extensive reports. Everything that we're talking about today, you can do in a standard Edcite account, but Edcite schools users could then also go into our item analysis report, our rubric reports, our performance band reports, and really dig in. I'm not going to go into that too much today because we have so many resources on that. We have, YouTube videos for those. We have one-pagers in our knowledge base, and we also have blogs for each one of those reports. So just know that the summary report gives you the ability to bucket standards into these three buckets of how to review. But you can go deeper if you have our extensive reports. I'll pause there because we're about to kind of hop over, right? We talked about how to make a pre and post test. We talked about a pre-test and how to use that data to bucket standards into how you're going to review further. I'll pause here quickly and see if we have any questions. You can throw them in the chat. Just give everybody a couple seconds in case you have anything. Okay, and if you think of anything, please feel free to add them into the chat. All right, so now we've taken the pretest, we bucketed our standards, we moved through our reteach calendar, really knowing exactly where we needed to do a quick review and where we needed to dig in further with students. And now we give the post test, right? So we've already copied it, we've already locked it, we've already sent it to students, and kids take the post test. Now what we're going to do is we're going to use our growth reports to really dig into how did students do? Did they grow in specific standards? Did students grow overall in their scores? I mentioned earlier that, everything that we're talking about, standard users can do as well, not only Edcite schools users. So I'm going to make a quick note here that if you're using a standard account of Edcite, you can analyze that summary report again and you just pull up your pre-test and your post-test side by side, and you're able to see, did students grow in their overall scores, and did students grow standard by standard? So I wanted to make sure that I call that out. If you're a standard user, digging into that summary report for the post-test is going to give you a great side-by-side comparison, so you can see where there was growth and maybe where you need to continue to reteach. For our Edcite schools users now, we're going to dig into that cohort growth report, the gradebook view report, and the student growth report. I'm going to kind of show you how to dig into those 3 growth reports. So I'm here on my reports page, right? And I'm going to look at this growth column. Here in this growth column, I'm now going to focus in on a couple of different things. So I'm going to focus in on who and what can I celebrate, right? So we talked about how Edcite helps you get real specific, right? Who are the students, the teachers, the classes that I can celebrate for growth? And what are the standards or domains that we could celebrate overall for growth as well? And then I'm going to decide on further reteach. So what students and standards need more attention? And that could look like maybe whole group, but at this point in the year, after you've already done your reteach calendar, it might be more small group reteaches. It might be really pulling kids to focus on specific standards at specific times during the day, depending on what your schedule looks like. So let's go ahead and dig into what that looks like. So I'm on my reports page. I'm looking at the growth column. I can really start with any 3 of these, because then once I run the reports, you'll see you can move between the 3 growth reports very easily on one screen. So I'm going to start with, let's say, cohort growth report. This was a district distributed assessment. I can open up my filters, and I'm able to see that I already have these selected because I was practicing earlier, right? But you see that these are the 2 tests we want to look at, and we're going to click confirm. Okay, the first thing you want to do, no matter what, is in the top right, it says change/view assignment order used in growth. And you want to make sure that from left to right, these are reading in chronological order. So this is correct because the pre-test is first. I'll show you real quick. If I put the post-test first, you're probably going to see a lot of negative growth, and that will be your quick, like, something's wrong, and that might remind you. You need to click up here and make sure that you're changing the order so it's in chronological order left to right. Okay, so this looks like what we want to see on a post-test, right? The kids have taken the pre and post-test. I pulled both the pre-test and the post-test into this report, and now I'm going to really be able to look at growth. So here's growth by domain. We had some huge growth in one of these domains here, right? I can also toggle to standard. Here, I think we have the Common Core standards tagged. This test might be tagged to other standards as well, but if I'm digging into Common Core, I'm able to see here the growth that students had on average for each of these standards. Then I can see that at the bottom of the report, I have the data by student, and I'm able to see for each standard whether or not a student grew, stayed the same, or went down. Quick, easy visual cues here. If we see this little red arrow, a student went down, green arrow, a student went up. So when we're thinking about these celebrations, right? Lisa, overall, we'll talk in a minute about how she might have done overall, but let's say she didn't grow too much, or maybe she even went down a little bit overall. I'm not sure, but we'll see in a minute. But I could still celebrate something for Lisa. I could still show her that she went up 33% for this specific standard. I can give her that certificate or that positive phone call home to make sure that she's feeling like the work she did in review is paying off and she's seeing growth. We can see that Mandy and Katie Bell grew in all 3 standards across the board, right? And we can see that more students fell in this standard than any of the other 3, because we can really quickly see those 3 red arrows. So just some real quick things that we're able to see as we look at this data. If I'm, a school or district leader, I might want to look at this data by teacher. We only had one teacher who assigned this in our practice fake school, right? But you'd be able to compare across teachers the same way I just did with students, which can, again, give you really specific places where you can celebrate your teachers and your classes. So yeah, there's multiple different levels of data here that you can look at. If you're a district leader, you can even look by school. We only had Ravenclaw take this test, right? But you can see that Ravenclaw grew all over the place. Let's flip over to the gradebook view report. This is by school right now. This is similar information, right? We're looking at growth. The bar graph is going to look a little bit different. We're going to see it in a table different as well. If I'm looking by school, I see this yellow line here that starts a little above 40 and goes down to 0. Just want to call out that when we're on this page and we're looking at the gradebook view report, any yellow line that goes down to 0 just means that that school, class, or those students didn't take the post test. So it stays yellow because they haven't taken it yet. If it was actually a 0, you would see it in red. So we can see here, the growth overall by Ravenclaw is just great, amazing growth. We can see similar growth when we're looking at specific teachers. Miss Ravenclaw did amazing, as she does. And then let's look at the student level, right? So we see these yellow lines going down to 0. That's a quick note to us that we need to follow up with those kids and make sure that they're taking the test. If we go down here, we can see the same information, but in table format. And when I hover over a student, their line is going to get a little bit darker. So that's just going to, kind of help me figure out who those kids are that still need to test. But then I'm also able to see a red line. Uh-oh, who's that? Who struggled on this test, right? And if I go down, I can see that it's actually Hermione Granger. She went from a 100 to a 92. So we know she has high standards. We're probably going to follow up with her, figure out what happened on that day or what misconception might have arisen for her throughout the reteach. But overall, this is really helpful because I can see how she did on the pre-test and the post-test. And even though her line is in red and she's showing negative growth, with this chart, I have all the information I need to get the full context that Hermione is probably still doing okay. Next up, we can see the lines in green, right? These are students who did show growth. Some students showed insane growth. Cedric Diggory, I don't know what he did, but he was studying hard and he showed a ton of growth. So there's a specific celebration. And then again, just these yellow lines that end in 0 just means that a student didn't take that exam, the post-test. And then we can see here, so Cho Chang stayed the same. We have Michael Corner stayed the same. If he's at 100, that's not really, something that we would be concerned with. But we could also be looking through this chart for any students that dropped. You might see students, with that red line like Hermione's, but maybe they dropped to a concerning number. So that tells you that that might be a student that's going to need some further reteach. So yeah, that's kind of just a walkthrough of the gradebook view report and how you can see all the data from the student all the way up to the school and district level, and even compare how different schools and classes did. Last one we'll talk about is the student growth report. We talked a lot about celebrations, right? But we might also want to consider who still needs further reteach, right? And so we could be looking at the average percent of these students, and yes, they showed growth, but their average percent might still be a little bit low. So we're seeing a few students here, like Anthony Goldstein, that might still need some increased instruction on specific standards, right? And so when we're looking across here, we're able to see that growth. We can also look by standard. And I'm just going to kind of head back to the gradebook view report real quick and go by student, and just call out that yeah, some of those students had lower percentages, and Anthony Goldstein, you see he's not quite where we need him, right? Let's say the passing is a 70, he's still not quite to passing. So this green line is exciting. And when we see it in this bar graph, it's exciting, right? That's a lot to celebrate with Anthony. He's going to get that phone call, that certificate, that morning announcement shout out, like however it is that you celebrate students. But he's also going to go on your list of kids that still need more intentional instruction. And then when we're looking at Lisa Turpin, let's go ahead and go back here as well. And let's look at Lisa. Yeah, so Lisa showed about the same amount of growth, right? When we're looking at her on the student growth report, about the same amount of growth as Anthony. But when we put these two reports together, that's where the magic really happens. And I can see Lisa doesn't need any further intense instruction in order to pass this test. She's already pretty much at mastery. So using these two reports together is where the magic really happens, right? We can celebrate that growth, we can be excited for students, and we can double check, are they actually where they need to be, or are we going to celebrate them and then make sure that we keep pushing and we keep improving so that they can pass that exam? So we dug into those growth reports, and you kind of saw me like live action in the moment going through and toggling between the three reports. because that's really where you're going to be able to see overall the most clear picture of who and what needs to be celebrated, right? What students and teachers and schools deserve celebration for growth, and then who still needs further reteach. We saw some of those kiddos that had great growth, but they're still going to need to continue to grow if they're going to pass the exam, right? Depending on the cut score. So those are the 3 reports that we recommend using to see growth on a pre and post test. And again, you can use any of our single assessment reports. Those are on the left-hand side, but we already have a plethora of resources for those, including YouTube videos, knowledge base, one-pagers, and blog reports for how to use those single assignment reports. But you can definitely use those as well with pre-tests and with post-tests. All right. So I'm going to kind of really quickly go back through everything that we did and make sure that we've, locked it in. Our 3 objectives were, first, we're going to be able to create a pre-test and a post-test. And in order to do that, what we did was we made a copy of the assignment, we renamed it, and we assigned it to students. If you're an Edcite schools user, that extra step is you have to unlock a common assessment and then relock the common assessment. So that was the first objective. We now know how to create a pre-test and a post-test. Our second objective was give the pre-test, right? And then figure out how that's going to inform our instruction. For this time of year, that's usually informing our review. We're going to take those standards and put them into those 3 different buckets, and we're really going to be able to decide how to reteach, whether it's a quick review, we're using pairs or groups, or I as the teacher really need to do that direct instruction where I'm showing students a specific skill. And I can do all of that from the summary report. I don't need to go anywhere else. And then our third objective was being able to use the post-test to measure whether or not our reteach was effective. And so for that, we're going to head into those growth reports. I put them back up on the screen just as a reminder. You'll go to your reports tab, go to those growth reports, and then from there, all you have to do is decide who and what to celebrate, and then decide who or what needs further instruction. So you can toggle between those reports, play back this webinar if you need to have that on while you're looking at those reports to really decide what to celebrate and where to continue to reteach.